I'm sorry for all the
No
delays.
worries, you're good.
We were eating lunch out at Todd's in Headland with May May and Sid every Saturday. And sometimes she gets into conversation with people and can't leave them alone.
Nice.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah. It's on speaker and I'm driving, so I should be able to hear you and communicate effectively the whole way.
All right.
I appreciate the pictures. Some of them I'd never seen. That picture of all the vans together, all the old vans.
Yeah. Do you know much about that family?
Well, not a great deal, except that it was, a big family like the one that the next generation was 9 children, and it looked like that Granddaddy Van's family was at least 9, maybe more.
Yeah.
But I didn't know any of them other than Kathleen, and she's, of course, was the last one to die, and many of us visited with her from time to time. She still lived in a house that they had in Abbeville, and Uncle Sam was kind of one of her caretakers, and along with James Robert Vann's children, who still lived in Abbeville at the time. So we would go visit, and for a long time, all the Vann property up there was held together, and at the Thanksgiving meal that we would always have at Lake Espy, Uncle Sam would pay to all of his siblings the proceeds from the farm's production that year, just like he did for the production of the Sam R. Vann property every year. But it was always just a little bit of money, wasn't very much. And then they wound up that Robert Vann and his family wound up buying the rest of the people who had an interest in the property, which included all the Vanns down here in the Headland area. But
And when you say up there, is that Abbeville?
yes, between Headland and Abbeville is the biggest portion of the property that he had, but some of it I'm talking about Dr. J.R. Vann property, and I guess it was W.C.H. Vann property before then. Robert Vann and Dr. J.R. Vann accumulated some more, or at least Dr. Vann did. Dr. J.R. Vann accumulated more than his own father had at the time that we were sharing in down here. So I remember a discussion about Uncle Sam said that they were going to offer the property for sale, and Robert came back and said, well, we can't find anybody that wants to pay as much as $600 an acre, and that he would pay that. And so they all voted and let him buy it, and he wound up buying all of it.
And
right now, he's dead, of course. I'm talking about Dr. J.R. Vann's son, Robert Vann, who would be about the same age as Uncle Bumps. His children are the ones that own the property now.
And when you say J.R. Vann, that's Samuel Richard Vann's older brother, roughly born 1871?
Yes, and he was the doctor.
Okay. And, with the Brannons, there's several generations memorized all the way back to Rozier. Is it like that for the Vanns? I know you said, William C.H. Vann. Like, do you know the next 2 or 3 generations?
I do not. I think that there probably is some information on it, because some of their offspring, Jimmy Vann, who would be a son of Robert Vann and a grandson of Dr. J.R. Vann. Jimmy Vann is about 65 years old now. He's got some health problems, but he lives in Macon, Georgia, and he is sort of a Vann historian. Okay. He's got more information. How much of it is digitized, I don't know, but he's got a lot of information, and I can get you his contact number and and you could contact him, or I'll contact him on your behalf if
Yeah.
you would rather.
No,
But,
I can call if you give me his phone number. I'll reach out to him.
okay, I'm not sure what his health situation is. Every time that anybody brings that subject up, they say, "Oh well, Jimmy has got this, he's got that, and he's going to share it with everybody." And I've never seen anything that he shared. But he is a bright guy, and he has a lot of Vann history, and I imagine that it goes back farther than any that you have found so far. Certainly more than the Brannons, and maybe even, I don't know how far he goes back with Solomon's, but
yeah,
he would go back with it.
Yeah, if you text me his phone number, I mean, I'll call him today.
Okay.
So yeah, just whenever it's safe for you to text it, you send it to me, and I'll reach out immediately and try to get something, get a conversation recorded on the phone.
Okay. Well, I'll stop up here in a minute and see if I've got his number in my. If I don't, I'm gonna have to get it from Sid or from May or somebody who may have it. I'm not sure that I do have it, but if I do, I'll send it to you within the next few hours.
Okay.
And if not, I'll find out who may have it. He has he has a brother. I mean, not a brother. He has a sister that's still living in Abbeville, who is a Daugherty, Daugherty. One of the, Robert Vann's daughter is named Faye, and she married a guy named Daugherty, Daugherty. My first wife was a Daugherty, but hers was Dougherty, and no relation. But Jimmy Vann's sister lives in Abbeville, and she'll have his number.
Okay.
I can give it.
Okay.
But anyway, we can go ahead and talk about anything else you want to talk about.
Yeah. So you said you had never seen that picture, the only sibling of Samuel Richard Vann's that you knew was the youngest sibling, Kathleen Vann.
The only one that I met.
Okay.
First, I knew about the others.
So, what else besides James Robert being the doctor do you know?
Dan Vann is a military hero, I guess. He served in the army and was injured mentally and possibly physically, and never was the same after that. He never married Dan. He lived with Kathleen. She never married, and of course he died before she did. But she was the last living one of those Vanns. But I knew some of the cousins. But they used to have in fact, the Espy reunion originally was the Vann reunion, including siblings of S.R. Vann Sr. And that would include Whit Owens, for example, whose grandfather would have been Aston Whitman Owens. And he married Mary Vann, who I think might have been the oldest of the Vann children, I'm not sure. And then, of course, Martha Vann married Dr. Robert Blackshear, right? And they're the ones that had the two girls, Brenda and Mary, and Mary married Jeff Sessions, Senator Jeff Sessions. So they're all part of the same family. And then I've met all these others. May is still living, of course, and she'll know something more about those. Her aunts and uncles would be the ones that you're talking about, that we're talking about here.
And what's the best way to record a conversation with Mamie? I know eventually I want to go down there myself. What are your thoughts on just like recording a conversation with her?
She would probably hear it better if we did it just like we're doing this.
Okay.
With somebody with her, so that she put her phone on speaker, and you can do whatever you want to with it, speaker or not. But it's clear to me now better than even listening to you through my hearing aids. And she has worse problems than I do hearing, so I think that she's going to be able to hear you better, and you would be able to hear her better doing it just on a speakerphone and sitting around her dining room table.
Okay. Is that something you or Sid could do in the next 2 to 4 weeks?
Oh yes, absolutely.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
can't do it today, and Sid probably can't do it today. We've had big rain down here, and he's got cows all over the damn place, out and scattered, and he's going to be busy for a few days.
Okay. No worries.
He can walk over there and do it almost any time, and put her phone on speaker and help her interpret what you're saying, or understand what you're asking, and then she can tell you what she knows.
Okay.
She talked to you about it today at lunch. They know more than they think they know, but when you have to kind of get in the setting in order to discover some of it. She remembered a few stories. I was asking her based on what you had sent, and I commented to you that I thought that Mom and Daddy were living with Grandmother Vann when Wayne was born, and she seemed to think that they might have still been living over next door to 102 Forest Street, 104 Forest Street, where I was born. And it was just that they were over at Grandmother Vann's house when I got run over by a car because Daddy was in the service, and even though he was only stationed out at Napier Field, which was very close to Headland, they were staying with Grandmother Vann when that happened. And yet he was supposed to have been born, Wayne was supposed to have been born in her house. And I was born in Annie Crump's house. And then, of course, Sid was born in the hospital. So they may know a few more things like that.
Yeah, and I know she's not much older than you and Wayne, but yeah, I found a newspaper article that said that your father was at Auburn University that fall before Wayne was born. And so, yeah, I was trying to just kind of figure out the like when.
I don't think that's true. I don't think it's true.
No.
I could be wrong.
Okay, I'll text you. I'll text you what the newspaper articles say, but it's they're listing everybody from Headland and where they're at, and so somebody else is there's somebody that's listing off the 30 people that are at Auburn or Alabama this fall, and whoever came up with that list listed your dad, so that the data is not 100% accurate. Probably they may have heard that he had plans to go to Auburn, but that's just what the newspaper said.
But I'd always heard that he went to Howard College, which later became Sanford.
Yep.
For a little while, and he knew something about Birmingham because when I was going to move there, he would tell me all about the streets and how they were laid out and how it would be easy for me to get around up there. And so I got the impression that at some point he had enrolled in some kind of college right after high school at some point, and went to one semester maybe up in Birmingham, and for whatever reason didn't go back. And he could have done that at Auburn also, but I don't think so.
Okay. Yeah, I've got a Howard a page from a Howard yearbook that says he's a freshman and it's got his picture on it. I'll text it to you.
Yeah, well that's true then.
Yeah, and then I'll text you exactly what I have in that newspaper article. So I'm going to text you that picture before I forget, and then I'll text you that newspaper article real quick, saying that they thought he was in Auburn the following year, but it was December 21st. 1938. But again, like I said, that when somebody mentions that there's a list of people that are going to this university, that's not necessarily. I don't necessarily think they've done their homework on every single person.
Yes, right. Those dates, and I've always felt like that mom and daddy had to get married. That she was pregnant when they decided to marry.
Yeah.
Very much like Dorothy and Wayne were pregnant when they decided to get married, and it just was not a big. It was a bigger deal back then than it is now, and even than it was, when Wayne and Dorothy got married. Back in the day, it was not a good thing to happen, and they hid it from people, and I think that's the reason that they were reluctant to talk about any of that time, and never told any of us about having an anniversary or when they got married or where and all that kind of stuff.
There was just a social stigma against it.
I guess, yeah. But,
How and yeah, and while you brought it up, when Wayne and Dorothy got engaged, so my understanding was that she wrote him a letter letting him know that she was pregnant, and then he just immediately took off to Utah. Is that?
That's exactly right.
Okay.
He had enrolled at Auburn, and he was actually going to school. I think he went about a month and a half before he was advised that she was pregnant, and there was no question about what he was going to do at all. It still upset my dad. He came into my room, our room, which was mine at that point, because Wayne had already gone to Auburn, and he was enrolled in the pre-engineering course and going to class. He was a great student, and nobody was ever worried about him not being able to make it in college. But anyway, when he found out that Dorothy was pregnant, he came home and told Mom and Daddy what he was going to do. And it was a shock to him, I guess, and maybe that stigma a little bit bothered Daddy. He felt like he hadn't coached him properly or something, and he was visibly upset about it. And I remember consoling him, and but mainly not because I was mature enough to do that, but because I didn't know what else to do. Because here's my father crying in front of me, and I didn't know how to handle that. So that's the way I handled it. Within a day or two, not too long after that, we were so happy. Everybody was happy that he got out there and got married, and he found a job, and everything was hunky-dory. And then that Christmas, December, I got on a Greyhound bus in Headland, Alabama, and was the first member of our family to meet any of your Utah relatives, because I went out there and spent the Christmas holidays with Todd and Jack and Garth and Wayne, and he was already working in the hospital. And she was pregnant because she was having morning sickness, but Betsy didn't arrive until the next summer in 1958, right, or something like that.
Yep. And what were your impressions of John Walton and Ruth Walton?
Absolute wonderful people. Couldn't have been warmer. Couldn't have been brighter, I didn't think. They were just like Headland folks to me.
Yeah.
And they had taken in Wayne, and the situation. I don't know what kind of stigma there was, if any, about that kind of a thing, as far as how Dorothy might have been judged, if you will, by the community.
So I'm pretty sure that Dorothy had been an unexpected pregnancy.
Yes, she probably was.
And so we have a history of her parents running around trying to get married the week of 4th of July, and they go to Tooele County, Utah, and the person's out of town, and they run north of Salt Lake. That person's out of town. They come back, and because they're trying to desperately get married quickly. And so I think, maybe the stigma was a little. Obviously, it's a very religious community who doesn't that frowns upon it. But I think John and Ruth were probably able to handle it better than other parents.
Yeah, well, I didn't know that, and I wouldn't have known it. It wouldn't make any difference to me. But I remember being impressed with both of them, and enjoyed it very much. I thought Ruth was just as sweet as my mama was to me, and John was just a good old guy, you know. I thought Jack and Todd were very nice to me. They just took me along with whatever they were normally doing over that Christmas holiday, and we went to visit their friends. They took me to Brighton. They took me to Alta. And I climbed up a mountain, you know, and learned what a pecan was. I didn't know what that was until I got out there. Just had a wonderful time. I guess for 4 or 5 days, I stayed with Wayne and Dorothy in their apartment. And I remember her having to carry a Kleenex around because she would feel nauseous and had to spit into the Kleenex. So it was at the first trimester of their pregnancy, I guess, because that's when that usually happens. And but she was just as sweet as she could be. I mean, I couldn't have been happier with things. And of course, when I got back, Mom and Dad had to have, or Mama especially, had to have every detail. And boy, if I didn't have it all written down, she'd grill me some more. And she felt better after all of that too. And it doesn't take but one time to meet any of those people out there before you just fall in love with them. And so that's what happened to me. That's what happened to everybody that saw him for the first time.
And what was your mother's reaction? You talked about, having to console your father. What was your mother's reaction when Wayne told her in Headland?
She did not exhibit any kind of abnormal behavior, in my opinion, now that I look back on it. He was the one that felt like he had let his son down somehow. And that is stupid. I see that now because I've had similar situations with my own children. Not a pregnancy so much, but sometimes worse than that. But anyway, I don't recall her being anything except concerned and start scratching and finding whatever resources she felt was necessary, setting up, finding baby clothes, and she just attacked the problem. And the problem was that neither one of them had any resources. And Dorothy, I don't know if she was working or not. She was working obviously in the summertime at where they
Yellowstone.
Yellowstone, yeah. But whether she had another job, I don't know. But she was pregnant and couldn't work for very long, even if she worked. So money was a big thing, and we weren't well off here. And Daddy was, I forgot exactly what he was doing. I think he was selling automobiles at that particular time in Dothan for Solomon Motor Company. That could have been after that, but anyway, it seemed like that everybody was contributing to the cause. Dr. Vann, obviously, since Mama worked for him, helped him start his practice, and she was his right-hand person. He had plenty of resources, and there wasn't any way that anybody was going to go hungry as long as he was around. But Uncle Sam, Uncle Bumps, Uncle Jack, all of Wayne's uncles and aunts were, not concerned about it from a stigma standpoint, but concerned about it that they would have what they needed to start a family that they were doing perhaps on an unplanned basis sooner than might have otherwise happened. And to me, it was almost like if I wanted anything or needed anything, I knew better than to ask. Yeah. Because the resources were being accumulated to send out there. And I don't know how well you remember Nana, but she would find clothes that Edith had, or that Emily had, or Kate Helen, or whoever it was. She got the word out that she needed any and everything that a baby would need coming on, and she would bundle it up and send it out there. I'm sure that somebody out there knows about all that stuff.
Yeah. Well, Dorothy's siblings, Alzheimer's kind of runs in the family, and
Oh,
so,
really?
yeah, her two brothers and sister, they have not passed away, but they're all dealing with Alzheimer's, and so I'm not able to gather information from them as I am with you and Sid.
I see. Well, I'm sorry about that.
No worries.
I didn't know the younger sister that well. She was obviously around out there, though. And I don't remember having much interaction with her. But Jack was the eldest, right, and then Todd was younger than Jack.
Yep.
And, but there weren't that many years between them. Maybe a couple of years, like there was between Wayne and I. Do you know how many years?
I don't.
It wasn't much because they kind of hung together also. They did have separate friends. I remember going with Jack to see some guy who had a little automobile that only one person could get into. I never had seen a vehicle like that, and this guy must have been well-to-do because he had gotten one for Christmas, I think, driving it around. And so I'd never driven on snow, and they taught me how to do that, and I'd never been anywhere trying to ski. And but we went to the ski areas, but we did not ski. We tried to ascend a little section of mountain. I mentioned the Tetons thing, and we did a little bit of that, but I wasn't properly clothed for anything, and I didn't have the gloves. I remember my hands getting real cold and red because of being out in the weather like that, and not enough sense to bring any gloves, I guess. But I mean, I had literally gotten on a bus when I got out of school for Christmas holidays, and the route was from Dothan to Chicago and then west to Denver and Salt Lake. And I had never been on a bus before that I know of. And when we got to Chicago, they said, "Well, you're going to have plenty of time here, and you can go and shave or take a shower or whatever you wanted to do." Because it took about 3 or 4 days to get out there. And I remember shaving in front of a mirror, and I heard the bus, the announcer called Denver, Salt Lake, blah, 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 points west, boarding at gate number 6 or something like that. And I thought the damn thing was about ready to go. And so I just stopped what I was doing and folded everything up, wiped my face off, and ran down there. And then I found out that was the first call, and it took like 2 or 3 more before it ever took off. But when I got to Salt Lake and looked in the mirror, I saw that stroke that I had made from my ear down toward my chin. It was the only thing that was shaved on my face. And I had a beard on the rest of it. Not a beard, but just a couple of days' growth. So that was embarrassing, but I got through that. So I had a great time, and it was quick. I had a girlfriend in Headland, and I remember communicating with Mama and telling I sent her a note that said, "I'll be arriving at such and such a time. You and Gene meet me there." That's what I said. I felt like an idiot. But sure enough, when my bus arrived, Mama and Gene Phillips, my little girlfriend, came to meet the bus. And, of course, I was thinking that I was a whole lot more important than I really was, even back then, because I was a football star type thing. I was a 10th grader, and Wayne was a senior, and I had all those older guys that were playing in the line ahead of me, and I got a lot of press clippings and a lot of attention because we had a good team, and we had a good team because of all those guys, not because of me. But I'm sure that I was a little bit more smart than I should have been.
As we all are at that age.
Yeah, I guess so. But anyway, I enjoyed the trip out there, and I felt like I was closer to John and Ruth and all of them because I was the first one to have any personal contact with them. And, I mean, I just loved him. I was so thrilled with the idea. And when Betsy was born, I'm telling you, it was almost like Jesus Christ being born. This was thrilling to think, Mama, her first grandchild. And you know how the Vanns are. There weren't that many brands to celebrate that kind of thing, but I mean, all of the Vanns and the Solomons and whoever else, Mama's friends, it knew the angst, I guess, that she had, or concern that she had for the way things happened and the need for family support and all that kind of stuff, and the way she did. Everybody was kind of chipped in, and it was kind of like Headland's new baby. It just happened to be in Salt Lake City, Utah. And then after that, it was kind of old hat. When Kurt, Julie, and the rest of them came along.
Nice.
I didn't know.
Well,
Those are my memories from that early time. And then we of course, followed them all the way through medical school. And the money issue didn't get less, it got bigger because the family was bigger. And even though I'm sure John and Ruth were doing whatever they could, and it could have been way more than what the Brannons and Vann were contributing to the well-being of Wayne and Dorothy. But the appetite was big also. Well, they had 3 kids before he got out of medical school, right?
yeah.
I'm not sure exactly how many he had when he
I mean, they had 4 before they got out of medical school. Yeah, Uncle Jamie was born in Birmingham when he was still going to school there.
Yeah, and then Amanda was born in Hawaii while he was in the army, right?
Yep.
And they didn't know that she was even pregnant until I got out there.
Yep.
But anyway, I mean, that was all. It wasn't a circus, but it was a whirlwind type of thing where there was just always news from out there. And it was always wonderful news, family-wise, and I'm sure that there was some worry, but that's the reason he went to the service in the first place, is that he could see he could handle himself the final cost of his medical training by joining the service. Same thing happened to Dr. Vann. He finished his dental education by joining the Air Force while he was in college, I guess. And he had already been called up for World War II in the beginning of the war. He joined, and then I guess the war was over, and he got out. And then when the Korean crisis came up, he got called up again and had to serve in Korea as a MASH unit type of thing. And anyway, he all of that, not the least of the reasons for doing that was the fact that it could help you finish your education, especially medical education. And it wasn't near as expensive as it is now, so it was a miracle. And it took a village to get them all through. Somebody with that many children and having to go through all the things that you have to go through to get the sheepskin or whatever you call it. The perfect snake. But we were every time anybody would go anywhere in our family, they would go through wherever Wayne was. They did the same thing for me when I was married first to Diane from LaGrange, and then even after the second marriage, Uncle Major and Edith would stop by if they were coming to Atlanta and I was living there. They'd come by just like they would if I lived in Denver. And they would expect to spend the night, but they would usually take us out to eat or bring something. I remember Uncle Major leaving his diabetes medicine, insulin, at my house accidentally on a trip, and they could talk about how difficult it was for him to get home at that time and get to a place where he could take some more insulin or whatever. So it just changed and added to the Brannon and Vann clan is getting married and having not a child, but seemed like one every other year. And then I did the same thing, so almost the same thing.
Yeah. Well, what do you know about Samuel Richard Vann? I know that he had a grocery store and that he died pretty young, but that's about it. Yeah.
And he also had a clothing store. There's some pictures around that show you quite the Vann Dry Goods store was on the north side of the square. I think he probably did that more than he was in the grocery business. I don't even remember which grocery store he might have been in, but part of. But the clothing store he was in for a good long while, and he did his farming in addition to being a rag merchant, if you will. And of course, they had to, like any merchant in that era, they had to carry a book of credits. They sell clothing to farmers who could only pay after harvest. And so they had some credit that they had to worry about, and it was not always good credit. They lost in some instances, and I remember Mama complaining about having to go with her brothers to get a haircut at Mr. Jimmy Ward's barbershop because he couldn't pay his damn bill at the Vann Dry Goods. And the only way that Granddaddy Vann would get his money back was to have his children's haircut cut by the man that owed him the money. And she didn't like that because she was a girl and she had to go to the boys' barbershop. And Edith was the same way. That's one little story I remember. But he apparently was, I don't know when in time Edith became associated with Major Espy. But I have a feeling, well, I'm not even sure when it was, to tell you the truth. It possibly could have been far enough in advance of Granddaddy Vann's death that Granddaddy Vann got some of the Espy largesse in the form of opportunities to acquire farmland, financing of one kind or another. Who knows? But Major was married to another lady, and that didn't work out, and they separated. They had Waddy Espy, who turned out to be gay, and apparently everybody knew that but me during that time. And but Edith and Uncle Major, they all cared for Waddy just as they would anybody. I mean, it was Uncle Major's child, and after Major and Mark got married, Major and Edith got married. When I was out there for a meal or anything, the blessing was always bless Waddy in the Navy, don't let him get killed in the Navy, stuff like that. So Waddy was melded into the Major Espy, Edith Espy family, but I think that just in looking back at the history of real estate transactions and my work at the power company, I would see who was selling right of way to whom and all that kind of stuff. It dawned on me that possibly Edith's marrying into the Espy family was a kind of a windfall, if you will, for the Vanns, and maybe even for Granddaddy Vann. If not, he had to be a pretty smart guy because he had accumulated something on the order of 2,000 acres of land, farmland, being in the clothing business, and I can't think of any other. I don't think that W.C.H. Vann or any of those his parents, I don't think they gave him any money. I don't think that they inherited any substantial amount of money. I think he just was a good businessman, and he may have got some help from Major, as I say, but he accumulated that land and was able to farm it in the Cabot farm on a share basis, crop sharecropper type thing. And he went to the farm a lot. There are a lot of stories about Uncle Sam. Uncle Jack went to Auburn right after high school. And he had a little gimpy arm, and he was not a physical specimen by any stretch, is my understanding. And none of them had ever been to college. And so Uncle Jack accumulated whatever they needed to get him in Auburn, and he was there when Granddaddy Vann died. And so Uncle Sam had to be the patriarch, if you will. He was like 13 months younger than Jack. It was a bam first two children that Grandmother Vann had. Could have been more like 17 months. I don't know what the time frame was. You could figure that out. Uncle Sam became the father, and I know that my mom looked up to him because he stepped in, and I mean, Granddaddy Vann left a pregnant woman with 8 children and 2,000 acres of land and a $10,000 fertilizer bill that they tell me had to be settled. I don't know whether it couldn't have been with the Espies because there was a connection there. But whoever it was demanded the money, and they had to sell an attractive farm between Headland and Columbia called Lodeva, Lowdeva. And where that name came from, I don't know, but it was a farm out there, and that was Uncle Bob Solomon was Grandmother Vann's brother, and he had married into the Reynolds family, and they were wealthy. And I guess maybe the Solomons were also well-to-do compared to the Brannons. And, losing my train of thought a little bit, but the selling of they had to sell something. Uncle Bob Solomon convinced Grandmother Vann that the best thing for her to do was to sell Lodeva and get the money and go ahead and pay everything that she owed, since Granddaddy Vann did not have a will, and they were going to have to own it, in equal parts. She would. I guess the law was the same back then. The wife would inherit half of the estate, and the children would inherit the balance of it in equal portions. But they did not probate it. They did not. They didn't go ahead and divide the property up at that time. They didn't do that until I was a grown man, and did it while we had the Porch House Cafe. So that would be after 1989, somewhere around. Well, it was about right before Grandmother Vann died. She wanted him to go ahead and divide the property up so that she would know who got what, is what she told me. And I helped Dr. Vann and Uncle Sam divide the property up on paper. And Uncle Sam put the final valuation on it, and that's how they divided it up when they did. But anyway, going further back to Major and Edith, one of the parcels of property that he acquired, and Mama wound up with that as part of her division of the Vann estate, and then Sid wound up with it as a part of Mama's estate. And it turns out that piece of property was bought for the non-payment of taxes for whatever the outstanding tax bill was. S.R. Vann stepped up in the county, and he knew. And back then, it happened that way. If somebody didn't pay the tax, it was taken back over by the county and then eventually by the state. And you had the opportunity. Your grandfather Wayne bought several pieces of property like that during his lifetime in Decatur, and I have too in Headland. But back then, when folks didn't have enough money to pay the taxes, they damn sure didn't have any money for food or anything else, because they'd pay that land rent first. I mean, they'd keep the land first. In this case, they were unable to, and nobody showed up at the auction, and Granddaddy Vann bid whatever it was, $7 or something like that, and got 50 acres of land that is now, we call the Rash Place, Joe Brown Field, and it's been added to a little bit. Dr. Vann owns property close by, and he gave Mama somebody to square up that property, and Sid inherited that. but that was acquired for next to nothing. So owning land was not that difficult, but it obviously was hard to make enough money to live on, and what you did make, a lot of it had to go to the bank if they loaned you money to operate. But for some reason, and maybe it was just Uncle Bob's notion that was a thing to do, and Major would have done it differently. And Major might have been able to hang on to it, but it was 800 and something acres of land, and when they finally did divide it up, it was like 1,200 acres of land. So at one time he had 2,000 at least, and perhaps more, but not that I know of. And so he had to be a pretty bright guy. And he had all those siblings, and one of whom had become a doctor, Dr. J.R. Vann. And then I don't really know that much about any of the others, except that they all married well. And I guess there's a lot of those people.
I've got Mary Vann married Hastings Whitman Owens.
That's right. I said Mary Owens was named after. She was the oldest, and then Martha was next, maybe.
I see Elizabeth Vann married Thomas Whitfield Armstrong.
Yeah, and I don't know whether it was the Vanns or the Armstrongs, but the Armstrongs, Whit Armstrong, been named after his uncle or something, not a direct relative, or through his mother's side of the family. He still got several hundred acres of land in Linden County. And he was a wealthy guy, banker in Enterprise. He got into some trouble with bank examiners or something, and he had to quit the bank. But he still owned all that land. As far as I know, he's still living. His name is Whit Armstrong. The Armstrong that you just named would be his great-grandfather, I believe, maybe his grandfather. He's younger than me by a few years. He was a director of Alabama Power, and that's how I got to know him since I worked for Alabama Power. Well, I knew him all along, but we talked a little more than maybe I did with others because he was a director of Alabama Power. And I worked for him for 15 years, my last job.
And then we got Martha Vann married to Robert Franklin Blackshear.
Right, he was a dentist, and they had Cranford Blackshear, who was a banker up in Blount County, Aniana, and they lived up there their whole career, Gadsden area. And they had those children, one of whom married Jeff Sessions, and another one Brenda married a guy named Smith. Brenda just died recently in the last few years. And then there's another girl that they had, and I don't think she lives in Texas. Those are descendants of Martha. They live right next door to Grandmother Vann's mother, who was named Laura Price. She was living in a house on East Church Street in Headland. Grandmother Vann lived at 109 West Church. This lady lived something like 108 or 107 East Church. And that would be Grandmother Vann's mother. And right next door to that is where Martha Vann and Dr. Blackshear lived, and that house is still standing. A big house with a porch around it. No longer in the family, but.
And then we've got Samuel Richard Vann after Martha, and then Ruth Armour Vann, and she married William Clarence Maddox.
Yes, I've met both of those people. I know I met Ruth. I don't really remember meeting her husband. I want to think she lived in Montgomery, so she was close with Uncle Jack, who lived up there also. And she had some children, and they would come to that reunion, and Vann reunion that Whit Owens from Columbia would organize like every year or two and try to get all of those Vann siblings and their offspring to come to it. and it was never very well attended. They might have 25 people. There are a few pictures around of, the food line, and it shows Whit Owens and maybe Dick Vann, Uncle Jack's son, one of his sons, and some of those people, and some of Ruth Vann, Ruth Armour Vann, did you say?
Yep.
I don't know where Armour came from, but some of her children would be there. I know Whit Owens' kids, one of them was named Vann Owens, did very well in life over in Vincent, Alabama, in St. Clair County, in some kind of a business. And he died a few years ago. He was younger than I am. Well, everybody's younger than I guess. But
And then William Cass Vann. I don't see a spouse for him.
no, and that wasn't Coot, was it? It was, I guess. It was Coot Vann.
Died
He
in
had some
1966.
I think they called him Coot, and I always wondered whether he was. No, William W.C.H. Vann was William Calvin Huss Vann, wasn't it?
Yes.
So this guy was named William Cass Vann, I guess. Didn't have a forename like his dad did. I thought he might have been a junior, but he apparently was not. Coot, that's all I know. He was kind of like Kathleen. He didn't. He never married. And seemed to be a little eccentric. But I don't know that I ever met him. I don't know when he died. You say in 1966?
Yep.
I should have met him, but I don't remember it.
No worries. And then Daniel Dinkins Vann died in 1933.
Yes, he was the one that served in World War I, and
he got gassed.
Yeah, he got some problem and he never got over it. Came back and died in Abbeville. I don't know when. You said 1933?
37.
37. So Granddaddy Vann would have been dead for 4 years by then, right? Did he die in 33?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I don't recall ever meeting him. But just hear the stories and whatnot.
And then you've already spoken about Kathleen Vann.
Yes, she was the baby. And she, I guess they didn't divide the property up maybe until she died. And they settled up with, maybe that was at the time that Uncle Sam was trying to protect the interest that they had in it, which would be his and his siblings' interest in it. And I felt like he was concerned about it because he thought Robert was screwing him. And looking at the numbers, it kind of looks that way. But, you don't know what property it was worth when that happened. But I remember hearing it, and I thought, well, I could have bought an acre of that for like $600 saved up. And that didn't give me any sense to buy it. And it wound up, Robert got it, and whatever money was divided up, just like they divided up the farm income every year from that particular farm operation. And from then on, Robert Vann and his family owned it, and he died, and then Darty married Faye Vann, Robert's son, daughter. He was the wealthiest, I guess, of that generation, which is my generation. Faye and I were the same age, are the same age, and she's still living in Abbeville. But her husband, Gerald Darty, assembled as much of the old Vann land as he could. He bought everything that any of his wife's siblings wanted to sell him, and I think some of them did. And of course, he got some of that because of his wife. And then he bought several other people's property that joined it. And right now, I think and her children have 400 or 500 acres, and sort of in the same place where part of the old Vann farm was. which just coincidentally was a place where we started, we being Alabama Power Company, built a transmission line back in the day that went from Abbeville to Eufaula, or Eufaula to Abbeville, and it terminated temporarily on the Vann property. And I have a copy of the easement that was acquired by Alabama Power Company from the Vanns, and every one of them had to sign it. So I have a copy of that somewhere. It's my mama's name along with all of her siblings and all of the Robert Vanns and all of whoever was still living. It was connected to the Vann.
All right.
So that's all of them. Is that all of the Vanns?
That's all of them. Do you want to talk about Emma Kate Solomon and her parents and siblings?
All I know about her parents is that her mother was living long enough for me to sit in her lap. I don't know when she died, but I was born in 1941. So.
She died in 1951. Emma Laura Price Solomon.
Yeah. I don't remember anything about her except she was bigger than Grandmother Vann. It just could have been what she weighed at that age, but she was a sweet lady, that kind of thing, and lived over there, as I told you, next to Martha Blackshear, Dr. Blackshear's house. That house, by the way, has been torn down or moved out. Somebody bought it and moved it out in the country, I think, and remodeled it, but I don't know where. That's all I know about her. I know that the Prices and the Solomons go back, way back. There's some of their members buried in Seal, Alabama, Seale. And Sid and I have been up there and looked at them. We've had some relatives in Pittsview, probably the Pitts family or something connected to the Prices or the Solomons. But there's some, I think that it's Grandmother Vann's grandfather that is buried in that cemetery. And Sid would have some more detail on that than I will. I've seen the grave.
I'm seeing that her Grandmother Vann's maternal grandfather was Jonathan Edward Price. He was a doctor during the Civil War.
Okay. And one of her grandfathers was a preacher, I think.
John Wesley Solomon?
I think that's what it was, yeah. And that grave, I'm pretty sure, is in Seal. I'm not sure about the other one.
It is. It says Seal, Russell County, Alabama.
Yeah. It's right off the main drag between Headland and Columbus.
Okay. So
I don't know of any. They used to say that Boozer Pitts, who I think might have been an Auburn football coach or something back in the day, was kin to them somehow. There's the Pittses and Solomons and Prices somehow connected up there. But I don't know much about that side of the family, about that particular level of the family. I remember Graham is what Mama called her, Graham Vann and Graham Price. It was her grandmother.
That's what who called? That's what your mother called her Graham Vann and Graham Price.
Well, her name was Price, right?
Yeah.
She married Solomon.
Yeah.
So I guess she would have been Graham Solomon.
Okay.
All I remember is Graham. That's what Edith and Emily and Grace and Sam and Bumps, all of them called her Graham. But I guess she was Graham Price Solomon. I mean, Graham was just her grandmother's name. But Laura. What was her second name? Was it Laura Catherine?
It's Emma Laura Price Solomon.
Emma Laura. Okay, so she's named Emma Kate after herself.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I don't remember anything other than meeting her and sitting in her lap and that kind of thing.
Okay.
I'm sure they traced all of us over there and did the same thing.
And her husband looks like John Thomas Solomon died in 1902. Do you remember hearing anything about him?
Not a thing.
Okay. And their children, they've got 8 children. Looks like Emma Kate Solomon is the fifth of 8. We've got Ava Price Solomon, and looks like she married Edwin Thornton Carroll.
Oh, that's Sadiva. That's Grandmother Vann's oldest sister.
Yeah.
She lived to be 107 years old, I think.
Yeah.
And they're the ones that Sadiva, they call her. I think that was short for Sister Eva, and the kids couldn't say that, so they wound up calling her Sadiva. And she and old Carol recorded on the wireless radio on a Morse code type thing. That's how they communicated with each other. I think she worked in one of the railroad stations, and he worked in Waycross, and that's how they met. And I guess they would get together by getting on the train and going to where the other one was. But they wound up settling in Waycross, and I've been over there and I met some of the offspring, but I could not tell you much about them. I think there's some of them still living. And Edith and Mama and other of her siblings would go and visit Sadiva occasionally back in the day when I was a real small kid, but I never went. But I know I do know about it, and they have an interesting. It was interesting to me that that's the way they courted each other. It was not before the days of telephone, so they were both wire transfer, or wire, whatever you call it, operators, and that's how they communicated with each other.
Okay. And then the second sibling.
Last I heard, they had a jewelry store in Waycross. I went over there one day when I was up in the last 20 years. I was traveling in that area, and I went to Waycross and went to the jewelry store. Whatever his name was, I think his name was Jimmy. Carol was not there. And they said, well, we can call him and he'll run up here to see you. I said, no, don't do that. So he had already left for the day, and they did. But that's the only one that I think I know. Who are some of the others?
May Elizabeth Solomon married Walter Bragg Oates.
Oh, Mamie, yes, I know all about Mamie. I know more than you want to know about her, but that was Grandmother Vann's next oldest sister, I think.
Yep.
And she married this guy named Walter Bragg Oates. He shouldn't have been named Walter Bragg Oates at all because he was adopted. His name wasn't Oates. His name was Miller. And according to Uncle Sam, he was about as sorry a guy as he ever ran into. I'll say that. He was somewhat joking about it, but he would be one of those guys that would, if I was a kid walking around the square, there was always people sitting out on barrels or benches or chairs or whatever in front of the livery stable with him, on a cedar stick, and talking and telling lies and drinking whiskey or whatever they did. Uncle Sam said he never thought he ever hit a lick in a snake work-wise. So I don't know that much about it. I don't remember. I mean, I do remember him. I remember Mamie, because she had a square face like her mama did, and Grandmother Vann had a narrower face. It looked like a different side of the family, but they had all those Oates children, Neil was the first one.
Yeah, Mildred, Walter, Wyatt, Mary, Price, Letta, Mamie, Walter, and Robert.
I guess there were 8 children. I think she had 8, Grandmother Vann had 9. And Neil would have been the oldest.
Neil, yeah, Walter Neil.
Walter Neil, and then I think maybe Lita Julia would be the next one.
It said Wyatt Stephen was the next one.
Oh, Wyatt was next. Okay, he died when I was in the 10th grade.
And then Mary Alice.
Mary Alice, that was Charlie Smith's wife.
And then Price Reynolds died when he was 2 years old.
Oh, yeah, I didn't know that.
And then Letta Julia.
Lita Julia.
Julia.
She was a pretty girl, and she was the era of F. Scott Fitzgerald and Zelda Sayre in Montgomery. And her husband was Gordon Person's executive secretary. And his name was Robert Merritt. Not Vernon Merritt. Robert Vernon Merritt, I guess. He went by Vernon, and they had a son named Bob. He probably was also Vernon Merritt. But he was a politician, and they lived in Montgomery, and they ran in those circles. Of course, Uncle Jack knew all about it, and they socialized a little bit up there. But they always kind of felt like they were a little bit better than the rest of the Oates family, I guess, and certainly better than the outlaw kin, like the Vanns and Brandons and so on. But they had some interesting kids. Lita Julia was wild as a buck, and so was Mary Alice, and Elizabeth, Mama, and Edith said that if anybody told more lies than Edith, it was Liv Stroop. She married a guy named Hank Stroop, and they had a boy named Hank Jr., and he's still living in wherever they make Pawleys Island, South Carolina, and he's a great guy. He was a kind of a sissy in high school, and we didn't like sissies back then. He wasn't tough, but he was a very nice young man, and we all thought he was gay, but he wasn't, I don't think. He married a girl from Heaven, Brenda Skinner, and they had children and have always lived away. He's retired, living in South Carolina, Florida. That was one of the children. And then Mary Alice was married to Charlie Smith, and Sid could tell you 100 stories about Charlie Smith. He was from somewhere up in north of Montgomery in a little town, and was moved to Heaven because his wife was from there, and he was a lifer, I think, in the Air Force guard, or whatever you call it. Did a lot of stuff. He was a talented guy, a good athlete, and he and Dr. Vann were really good friends, and he was a big supporter of Headland Athletics. Just a wonderful guy. He had married Charles Smith, and he worked for Dr. Vann in the dental office for a long time, and she was definitely gay and never married. And then they also had Lynn, who married a guy named Bullock and lives out in Texas now. And she and Sid are tight. And she's with his team. I used to with her anytime. She's got a couple of kids. I don't know anything about them, but that was Mary Alice. And then Walter Bragg Oates Jr. was about the fourth or fifth oldest kid, I guess. And when he laughed, he sounded like a damn billy goat. Sound like that. And his son, whose name is Wyatt Oates, after Bragg's older brother, laughs the same way today. He married Zelda Hardy in Heaven, and he's sort of a ne'er-do-well person himself, but he's dead now. He worked in the fertilizer business, was a fertilizer salesman, and so he had a great personality.
And then they've got Robert McCreelis Oates.
McCreelis, yeah. His mother's sister was a McCreelis. I think her maybe named McCreelis. And some aunt maybe Oates was named McCreelis. And we called him Mackey. He's the one that lived right next door to where Dr. Vann moved when he moved out of the Vann house, moved out on the south side of town. Mackey died. His wife Jean Armstrong Oates died. They had two girls. They're both dead. And there's only one surviving relative, and his name is something Morgan. and he lives in Florida, in the house next door to, or on the corner. It's actually next to Mom and Daddy's house, and it backs up to where Dr. Vann lived, where Mayday lives now. House is still there, and he doesn't want to do anything with it. It's just kind of running down, kind of like ours. That Sid lives in. Nobody lives in his. Mackey was Jim's age, Dr. Vann's age. He was an effeminate sort of a guy, but he was a good athlete. He went to the service when he was in high school, along with about 4 or 5 other guys from Midland. And back then, when they went in right at the end of the war, and when they got out, I think they might have served 2 years. And when they got out, they let them come back to high school. They came back, and of course, they were tough as nails compared to the typical high school athlete. So Midland had one of its best football teams. It had Reuben Shelley and Don McGriff and Mackie Oates. And I can't remember, there were 4 or 5 others that did the same thing. That was Mackey's story. He worked for Eastern Airlines as a ticket agent, and they were trying to get into, his side of the story was that they were trying to make him retire, and they transferred his home office or his base of operation to Montgomery instead of Dothan or some other place. He had to get up and catch a plane to go to work, that kind of thing. But he eventually retired, and his wife lived on, and I can't remember what her maiden name was, but Bragg's wife was named Sarah. They lived next door to each other, 2 doors down from where they were reared on Broad Street. And Sarah was a woman, I think, from Dothan. I don't know where she was from, but she was a big horse person. And she had horses on all the oats land behind the house back there. At one time, Uncle Walter owned maybe 100 acres back there. By the time Bragg and them got a hold of it, it was only a few acres, but enough for a horse. And Sarah and Bragg had 5 kids, I think. You probably got all that information, but one of the stories they tell about him is that one of the boys got on one of the horses one day and rode it into the house, into the living room of the house, through the beginning. All this, and I don't think the horse crapped on anything, but it was just a story that got around, and it was true. He did ride the horse in the house. But Bragg eventually became an alcoholic and passed away at a fairly early age. And his sons, one named Frank and one named who lives in Auburn, and Wyatt lives in Headland, married Zelda Hardy. And let's see, there's another one, two or 3 girls. I can't call their first names now, but they are back in the area.
Okay. Well, so that's all the Mamie Elizabeth Solomon's children, right, and grandchildren. What about Emmett Curtis Solomon?
Oh, yeah. Uncle Kurt lived right next door to Grandmother Vann. He worked for the power company at some point in his life and got an injury to his hand from testing a hot electrical wire. He worked his whole career with them. He was a valued employee. I think he might have even worked for the Headland Electric Company that operated Headland's electric service before it was sold to Alabama Power Company in the late 30s, early 40s, maybe somewhere along there. And he was a hunter. He had 3 children. Lorene, the oldest, would be Mama's first cousin. And she married a guy named Robert Hall in Dothan, who happened to own a dairy right where they wanted to build the circle around Dothan. He became a wealthy man, and overnight had to get out of the dairy business. He was old enough to get out anyway, but that was Lorene, and she was a nice lady. They had a couple of boys. I think both of them are dead now, I'm not sure.
I think
Bobby.
Thomas Walton and William C.
Billy and Bobby.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that one of them was, maybe both of them were school teachers. I think both of them are dead. I don't know.
Yeah, died. Died in 1988 and 1987.
Okay, good. That was all of Lorraine's, and then there was Tom, who was gay. Apparently, I didn't know any about gay people back in the day. It's a little bit of a shock to me, but I didn't know what they were. Didn't know how many of my own family were. But anyway, Tom was
it just it's kind of a social stigma, just not talked about?
Probably was back in the day. Yeah, I mean nobody understood it, and I mean I don't understand it either. But I understand there are people like that. Some people thought Rock Band was gay. He might have been. I don't know. I know that Waddy Hesby was, but he wasn't kin to us except by marriage. And Tom Solomon was definitely gay, but a wonderful artist and a wonderful person. You've seen some of his paintings, I'm sure. If you hadn't Googled him, and you should be able to see those. He painted pictures of trains that looked very realistic. I guess maybe he worked for a good portion of his life. I'm not sure what his career was, but he was a little older than Mama, I think, and the Vann boys. I'm not sure how old he was. And then Will was the youngest boy, William, and he was an ordinary guy, and he had a couple of kids, two boys, Curtis and Phil. Curtis made a doctor and lives over in front of Lena Beach now. Maybe retired now, but he had some marriage issues like I've had. He'd been married more than one time. Or maybe, I don't know, anyway. They were pretty normal people. Phil, I think, lives in Montgomery, maybe works for the VA. I know there's a big VA hospital out close to where he lives. One thing he might have worked for him. And Rose was their mama. She lived in the house next door to Dr. Vann's dental office. And that's where Will and Rose and the two boys were reared. The boys were reared there. Rose died and they sold the house. Somebody else lives there now. But they were good, solid citizens, all of them, Uncle Kurt and Aunt Gussie. Gussie was a Roberts, and I think that her dad, well, I know her dad was named Roberts, and they may have lived right next door, which a place that later became the parsonage of Headland Methodist Church. Used to be on that corner. So when I was growing up, the preacher always lived next door to us. So we had to be on our special good behavior with a lot of the times because of that. Now, I had some wild stories with some of them because I'll tell you two quick ones. One about Aunt Gussie Solomon and the other one about Vance Mason, who was a preacher that lived in the parsonage at the time I was in my teenage years. First, Aunt Gussie had one leg, and I don't know how she lost it. But I think it was like her left leg, and she never would get a prosthesis. She maybe we didn't even have them back then, but she wore a crutch. Used a crutch to get around. She had a friend who coincidentally did not have the other leg, and so they went shoe shopping together. This is a damn truth, now, Logan, I'm telling you. They went shoe shopping together. They wore close enough to the same size that they could buy one pair of shoes. And they could buy two pairs of shoes. They both have two pairs of shoes. Yeah. So that's a story about her. She was a sweet lady. She raised Tom and Lorraine and Will and all those grandchildren right there next to grandmother Vann's. And he had a bird dog named Pep. We were talking about that today at lunch. They may remember Pep. He was a pointer dog, black, brown, and white. Not pretty, according to Mainlay, but mean as a damn snake. And I would walk, I don't know how old I was, 3 or 4 maybe, walk from grandmother Vann's house to our house, which was, I could go out the back door and jump over the fence and be there. But for whatever reason, this day I decided I was going to go front way out the front door and walk down the street and get to the corner and turn right on Forest Street and walk down to my house, or Mama's house. And I almost got to the corner and I decided I was going to cut through the parsonage lot, which was right next to Uncle Kurt. On the other side of Uncle Kurt was Grandmother Vann. So it wasn't very far. But as soon as I turned the corner, I got off of my sidewalk onto the property. Here comes Pep, barking and growling, and I started running. And I didn't have, but I don't know how far it was. It couldn't have been more than about 300 yards to run. And I ran like hell, and damn if the dog didn't bite me right in the gluteus maximus. Just as I jumped up on the porch, he picked a hunk out of me, out of my butt. And of course, Mama thought that was the worst thing in the world, and threatened to shoot the dog and call Uncle Kurt. It wasn't the first time he had been bit in the can, because Uncle Kurt was used to dealing with him. He said he'd take care of his dogs. Don't worry about it. Don't walk on his property. And that's what I had done, I guess. Cut off on his lot. But Pep was a good bird dog, apparently. He sure protected the neighborhood and protected his mistress, who didn't have but one leg. And then the other story about Vance Mason is that he joined a group of ministers that was going to the Holy Land. He hadn't been living there, hadn't been a preacher in heaven for long. You know, the Methodists changed every 4 years. And back then they were pretty religious about changing on those 4-year cycles. And anyway, when he was gone, while he was gone, before he left, he told Mama that he wanted to build a fence around his backyard. And since it joined their property, he wanted to make sure that it was okay with them and where to put the fence and this, that, and the other. And Mama said, well, of course you can do that, and Sam will build it for you. He's been helping his daddy and his Uncle Sam build fences out at the Vann farm, which Daddy and Uncle Sam rented from the Vann estate for years. That's where the cattle operation was. And Wayne and I got stuck building the damn fences. And Uncle Sam was a taskmaster, but he would cuss you out, say to get your ass behind you when you were driving a staple, and don't drive ahead of time, and blah, blah, blah. Tell you everything to do. And anyway, she volunteered my efforts to build a fence around the preacher's backyard while he was gone for 2 weeks in the Holy Land. And I got out there with my post hole diggers, and I set a post or two, and I didn't string any wire, I don't think, before he got back. But I had, we lacked, when he got back, he wanted another post in a different place, or maybe an additional post or two. And so I got up there and I was helping, and he got some Uncle Sam in him, I guess. And he said, no, you do it this way. And I wanted to say, damn it, I built more fences than you have. And I ain't but 15 years old. And I said, I know how to build it. And he said, no, we got to put clay in there so that when it hardens up, the post will be sturdy. Well, the opposite of that is true. If you want to learn about building fences, you pour sand in the bottom, and the sand packs to the point, and it is like concrete. At some point, you could not grasp the notion that you put sand in the bottom of a post hole. And then as you get closer to the top, you put this dirt that you dug out on top of that, and so that it all looks like. But the bottom of it is sand, and you can actually tap it and shake it, vibrate it, and it'll get tight before you even have to put the dirt in. Well, it was something that I could not understand, how a grown man could know how to build a damn fence. And I was sure I was going to make a bunch of money, but it turned out that she offered my services for free. And I never saw a nickel out of it. And I didn't like that preacher from then on. He wound up, I think, losing his mind and getting a divorce and remarrying. And Mama was really close to him, and his wife too. And some of his children were still around in the Tallahassee area. They used to visit Mama. But they were close. And he wrote a book. There was a book somewhere that he wrote, and you can tell he's out in left field. When I read some of that book that Mama showed me. That's all the stories I can think about him.
I like it. I like it. We can keep knocking out Emma Kate Solomon's siblings. We got Ralph Sporman Solomon.
Must have been a great guy. I remember what he looked like. I don't know. When did he die?
49.
Okay, well, I was only 8 years old, and I wouldn't have known much about him. But he I guess he was probably the guy that maybe inherited the most of the Solomon estate. He wound up with property that none of us, others of them seemed to have. And he owned the hardware store in Midland. He owned a lot of the property that most anything Major Espy didn't own, Ralph Solomon owned. And he operated that hardware, and he had stuff out the back. He was involved in a lot of things. His daughters, of course, were first cousins to Mama and her 15. And they were all close, but she, let's see, Uncle Ralph had 3 or 4 daughters.
Yes, it looks like he had James Daly, born in 19...
Jim Daly Solomon was his son, and he inherited. He's the one that married. Well, no, he married somebody else, but their children live pretty close to where Mama's house is now. And that was Jim Daly. And then he had Sarah, who married Sam Carr.
Yeah,
she may not be next in line.
He had, this thing says Catherine Solomon, 1911. Then Martha Solomon, 1914. Then Sarah Solomon, also 1914.
Might have been twins, I don't know. But anyway, who is the child after Ralph, first lady, first girl?
After Ralph, it's Emma Kate.
I think that was Kitty, and she married John Ari Capps, C-A-P-P-S.
Okay.
Do you show that?
Well, I was looking at the children of John Thomas Solomon and Emma Lawrence, Laura Price, like Emma Kate's siblings. Who are you asking about?
Ralph Solomon's daughters.
Ralph Solomon's daughters. The list, which may or may not be correct, it says Jim Daly, Catherine, Martha, Sarah, Mary Emma, and Corinne Ruth.
Yes. Yes, they all survived, I think. And I know a little bit about all of them. I don't know whether you want to get into that detail or not.
Sure.
Jim Daly was his oldest child. He inherited the hardware store and most of everything else. And the oldest daughter, I think, was Kitty, Catherine Capps. She married a guy from Capps, Alabama, named Capps. And he had a pretty good amount of land. And he went all the way back to Martin Van Buren Capps, who was one of Henry County's wealthiest people. And eventually, I guess, he died, and somehow the land got all divided up. But that's where the Capps name came from. And they had Ralph Solomon Capps. John Ari Capps. They call him Ari, A-R-R-I-E. And Kitty Capps had Ralph Solomon Capps, who was another gay person, and he worked in California in something in the hotel industry or whatever. And then they had a second child, and I don't even know whether to tell you this or not, because I don't know that everybody knows it. But Kitty Capps got pregnant by Dr. Carl T. Martin, who was the local doctor when I was a kid there. And their second son, John Ari Capps Jr., is not John Ari Capps' son. He's Carl Martin's son.
And when did that become known?
I'd say, well, now I think everybody knew it back then because he looked just like Dr. Martin. But I never paid any attention to it. I didn't hear it until I was, in high school. And John was 1 year behind me, and he was a buddy, of all my friends who I hung out with, 1 year younger than me. And I guess I hung out with him too, played poker and whatever you do when you're a kid and heading that age, drink beer and chase girls and all that kind of stuff. And I never thought anything about him being anybody other than John R. Capps' son. But whenever I heard it, found out about it, I don't know who told me. But you can see that was the case. And of course, John Capps wound up claiming all of the land that Mr. R. Capps had. And it's his farm now, his children's farm. And Ralph got the house. And that was the deal. Supposedly, as Ralph's living in California. And when his daddy or his mother died, I guess, last. And somehow John wound up with all the property and Ralph wound up with a house. And they couldn't have been that close in value, but possibly were, I guess. I just don't see it. Because it happened, on into the 60s. That, I believe. When does it show, you show him dying? You don't even show him dying. You don't even show him baby.
Catherine's husband, Kitty's husband, says 61.
61, yeah. So I finished high school in 59, so that was about when I learned about it. But that's just that's a fact. And I think Mama said she did it, so everybody else. Mama knew a lot of things which she didn't admit until I told her I'd heard it from somebody else, including the notion of a possibility that Charles Woods is actually an illegitimate child of Annie Woods, Crump. We talked about that before, didn't we?
When did you have that conversation with your mother? Was that like right before she died, or was that earlier in life?
Earlier, but not that much earlier, when we talked about Charles Woods. I don't remember when we talked. I don't think I talked to her about the Cap situation until way on later. I can't remember exactly when. I didn't learn it from her. I don't think. I don't know who I learned it from. I started putting two and two together and started looking at resemblance and all that. And I somehow was unconvinced that's the case. But see, John Capps had two children, and one was named Christopher Capps, and as far as I know, he may think that his granddaddy was Laurie Capps, and it wasn't. And I don't want in that discussion if that's the case. So that's all I can say about it. They also have a daughter, and she married somebody else, but they're all named Capps. And I don't even know that they know. I don't see how they could miss it, but Dr. Martin, as far as I know, he had a son of his own, Sonny Martin, who had the best of everything, went to high school at GMA, Georgia Military Academy, always come home in the summertime with a ducktail and the latest dance step, and the ladies loved him. But his mom and daddy thought that Evan was too small of a town, I guess, and he might have gone to some parts of elementary and middle school. When he got old enough to get close to an adult, they sent him to military school. Could have had something to do with his behavior. He's reputed to have gotten shot in the butt stealing watermelons, and his daddy was such a hard ass that he wouldn't take him out. He pulled on one or two, not trying to get him out, but trying to give pain to his son who had done this. And they tell the story, that he had to go to his dad and tell him he had gotten shot. His daddy refused to take the buckshot out of his ass.
Yikes.
I I know I got shot one time in a dove field, and one little piece of lead went into my neck, and the doctor, another one stuck under the first layer, and they pulled a couple of them out, but they said the one that had penetrated the farthest was near a blood vessel, and they would rather not take it out, and it shows up on every X-ray that I ever had since then. It's still in my neck. You can feel it.
How old were you when that happened?
Oh, I was married and living in Peachtree City, married to my second wife. So I was from 1970 to 1975, somewhere along there. The dove field, I had just gone with a bunch of guys, and one of them got gun hacked before he checked the terrain. I went down to pick up a bird, got shot down that way, and hit me, sort of broadsided me, and I bled a little bit, but it wasn't a bad injury.
Wow. All right, so.
But anyway, I can imagine trying to dig them out of your butt.
Yeah.
You really got a load of them. And Dr. Martin was the kind of guy that he was rough and gruff. He was not a gentle doctor. He could give you a shot for anything. I know I had asthma as a kid, and they told me Dr. Martin was coming to the house to give me a shot. And I hid under Mama Kate's bed. It took them a while to find me. But they finally drugged me out and they gave me a shot. My asthma miraculously went away. So whatever it had, they had a shot back then that would make your breathing ease off pretty quickly. I don't know what it would have been, but something.
So we got Kitty Solomon, her younger sister Martha Solomon.
She married Dr. Holly, Dr. William Holly from Sampson. They had 2 kids, Elizabeth and Bill, William Holly Jr. Both of whom made farms. Dr. Holly was a pharmacist and had Holly Drug Company, sold cherry cokes, put all his medicines together in the old-fashioned drugstore, kind of like the one that's at Landmark Park now that came from Enterprise. It was a drugstore that operated when the pharmacists had to make up a lot of the drugs themselves. And he was Auburn's oldest alumnus when he died. I think 104 or 106, maybe somewhere along in there. He walked a lot. When we had the porch house for 20 years, we had the porch house from 1989 on for the next 19 years. I think it was when I got out of it. But he would walk to the porch house on Fridays to get his lunch, catfish lunch, and walk back and eat it at home. And he walked up there a lot of times for other reasons. He was just in good shape and lived a long time. Martha was his wife, pretty girl, died long before he did, obviously. And then Bill has since died, and Elizabeth is still living, but Bill's wife also just died not too long ago. So he was a good friend of mine, and he was like first cousin once removed, or third cousins. And we were always close growing up. He was not an athlete, but I'd spend most of my time playing whatever athletic season it was, and he might have been in the band. I can't remember where he was, but I know he was not an athlete. But I still liked him, and he was a good man. Died suddenly of a heart issue at about 65 years old, maybe 62 or 3. And
the next daughter of Ralph and Sarah Solomon is Sarah Naomi.
I think that's Sarah that married Sam Carr.
Yep.
Sam T. Carr Jr., I think it was. Maybe he was senior. I don't know.
Yeah, Sam Tullis Carr Jr.
Okay, well, he and Daddy were in partnership in Car Electric and Supply Company. After Daddy worked for a long time at Solomon Motor Company selling cars. I think we might have mentioned in my last conversation with you about the hardware store.
You did.
How that all came about. He worked there for, I want to say 5 years, maybe. He bought, Uncle Major loaned him $8,000 to buy half interest in the hardware, and he paid that to Sam Carr. and then he tried to pay the bank back, and I don't think he was able to do anything but pay the interest for all those years. And Uncle Major apparently didn't get frowned upon by the bank examiners and was able to carry the loan with no principal reduction for that long, based on its value, maybe. And at some point, they just realized that it was not going to work out, and Sam Carr bought Daddy's interest back for the same $8,000 he sold it to him for. And so he had that money and went on to his, I guess he went on then maybe to the job for Charles Woods, selling houses that Charles had built. But that was Sam Carr. Sam Carr himself later could not handle the humidity and bugs that we had in Headland because of some breathing issue he had, and he was advised by his doctors to move to Florida, and he had already, he may have bought the property down there because of that, but he had been going down there fishing. He was a big fisherman, liked to go fishing long before they closed the hardware, and it may be that I just heard about it at that time. But anyway, he moved to Palatka, Florida, and continued to live with his wife, Sarah, and they had 2 children, 2, I think. Sylvia Carr was 1 year behind me in high school. She finished high school at Headland. And then she married a guy named Fred Walden, who was also from Headland, and they moved to Bay Minette, Foley, one of those towns around Mobile on the eastern shore of Mobile Bay. And then the other boy was named Sam T. Carr III. And he grew up partly in Headland, and I think he finished school in Florida. And he still lives there with his wife, and he's got children. He is a former president of the what's the guy's name? Bartram Trail. William Bartram was I don't know what he was other than a biologist or zoologist or somebody. Wealthy family.
A naturalist, writer, and explorer.
Naturalist.
Yeah.
Right. Well, Sam is, maybe still or was, the president of the Florida chapter of the William Bartram Association. That was the only place I would see him, because Sid and I supported our friend T.R. Henderson, who lived in Headland and who was also a member of the Bartram Society. And we'd go to several of their meetings that they would have. And Sid has a greater interest in history than I do, but I'm getting certainly more knowledge. But that's the only place where we ever see Little Sam. We call him Little Sam Carr, Sambo Carr. But he looks like Andrew Carnegie if you see a picture of him. Now he got gray hair and gray beard, and that's what Andrew Carnegie looked like.
Okay. The next sibling or next child of Ralph and Sarah Solomon is Mary Emma Solomon.
She married a guy, let's see.
Is it Paul Freeman Carr?
Paul Carr, that's right. So she would have been, and I think Paul was a brother to Sam T, so that sisters married brothers. I believe that's right. Sam and Paul married Sarah and Emma, and their children were double first cousins. And cousin Emma, what we call her, she lived her last few years in the extended care nursing home in Dothan, and Sid and I think Sid would, I know I would, to her 100th birthday that she had in the nursing home, and all of her kin came. I think Sambo came to that, and I know Sylvia did. And she died not too long ago, 5 years ago, maybe, something like that.
Yeah, died in 2022. So.
22. It's about 3 years ago. That was sooner than I thought. That's all I know about her.
And then the next sibling, the last sibling, is Corinne Ruth Solomon.
Ruth Solomon was married a guy named Charles Smith, if I'm not mistaken. Not the same thing that her cousin, I guess, married Mary Alice Oates, married Charles Smith, and then her first cousin, Ruth Smith, married Ruth Solomon, I guess, married another guy named Charles Smith. And they lived in Hedon. They had a couple of kids, Jan and Linda, and they could have had another one, but I know those two. Linda is still living, barely able to function. Jan died of obesity, if nothing else. She was always fat. And then Linda was older than I, and she still owns the old Ralph Solomon house in Hedley, still sitting there, just deteriorating, and has for years. She also owned, as did several of the Solomons, homes in the Sunnyside area of Panama City, where you have probably stayed as a kid.
Yep.
And his Uncle Bob he had 4 or 5 lots down there in a big house, and he encouraged Uncle Jack and the rest of his family to buy properties, and most of them did. Uncle Jack's, or one of the ones that Uncle Jack bought, is the one that Dr. Vann built the cabin on, sits on it now, and then Dick and Jack still own the vacant lot next to it, and now, of course, they own the cabin too, which was a source of bad news for me, because I didn't realize that the way it was, the story I heard about the way it came about was different than the facts, and the facts were that apparently it was never intended that Uncle Jim, Dr. Vann, would own the damn place, and he was going to have a life estate in it. He built the house on it and used it for all of his life, and still there doing the same thing, but it was not going to be left to whoever Jim Vann wanted. It was going to go back to the Dick Vann, to Dick and Jack, Uncle Jack's children, upon Dr. Vann's death. He had a life estate. I finally saw the deed, and it all made sense to me then. I was resisting Dick. He was objecting to not being included in part of the will, Dr. Vann's will, and I was objecting to him insisting that he wanted the cabin, he wanted the house, and he wanted the damn bank account that Nana had so diligently kept for so many years to keep money in there to fix whatever went wrong down there, and then made me promise I would continue to do that after she died, along with looking after her damn brother and 2 sisters until they died, and I agreed to all of that. So that's how that came about, and that's the other part of. That's all I know about the Ralph Solomon folks.
Gotcha. All right. And yeah, you tell me how much time you have, or if you're wanting to wrap things up. We're going through all the Solomon children. We've covered the oldest 4. We have the younger 4 remaining. And so, have you got time, or are you wanting to wrap things up?
I've got another. I'll be at Libba's house in about 10 minutes.
Okay.
So I've got 10 minutes.
We could try to cover the, kids. We could leave Emma Kate Solomon, obviously, for another day, because we're going to go deep into all of your mother's siblings. The next sibling younger than Emma Kate Solomon is William Solomon. Actually, he was a baby. Born in 1896, died in 1896. Then you have Robert Edward Solomon, who you've talked about a few times.
Uncle Bob, he married into the Reynolds family from Clopton, North Henry County. Very wealthy, land wealthy people, and Uncle Bob was a smart guy. He bought pecans, loaned money. I think it was probably Reynolds money. Many of the right-of-way documents that I'd see showed Bob Solomon's name on there because he had loaned people the money to buy the land across which we were building a transmission line. So I got to learn a little bit more about his business career, but he was always maybe with her money and maybe with his own sense, or certainly with both, became a very wealthy guy and owned a lot of real estate. He left land to Troy State University. He left a lot of land to Earl and Allen. Earl was his son, and then his daughter was Cecile. He married a guy named Weems, a doctor, and he was from Indiana too, I think, originally. And they moved and lived in the Fort Lauderdale area, I believe, of Florida, and raised a whole separate set of Weemses down there. But they were first cousins with May and Kate Helen and all of the Vanns, and always visited and close kin, close relationship, but different amount of money because Weems was a doctor and Uncle Bob was a wealthy guy. But he was there for Grandmother Vann when Granddaddy Vann died and performed a significant role in the life of her children.
All right, and then Corinne Solomon.
Corrine is her name, is what we called her. She was the youngest, and she married a guy named Camp,
Thomas
J.S.
Benjamin.
Camp, I believe.
What? Thomas Benjamin Camp.
T.B. Camp. Okay, well, there was a J.S. Camp that owned a grocery store. It probably was kin to that guy, and he also built the house, the porch house, that we bought when we started the porch house. It was originally owned by and built by a guy named Camp, who I think it was J. Stanton Camp. I don't know that he was a brother to T.B. Camp. But anyway, that marriage didn't work, and they had a daughter, Joy, who married Fred Arnold in Abbeville, and she spent her whole life in Abbeville. And Fred Arnold happened to be Oscar Ezel's first cousin, and Oscar, of course, married Emily Vann Ezel. And what are we talking about here? We're talking about Corrine. Corrine owned a store next to Uncle Bumps' store on the square in Headland, Corine's Fashion Shop. And the Vann girls worked up there, just like I worked at Uncle Bumps' store in the holidays and whenever he needed help. Wayne or me or some of his nephews would work and help him. And the girls did the same. Vann girls did the same for Corrine. She sold clothing, and so they always had an opportunity to buy decent clothing. And I guess they could pay for their own haircuts. They'd have to go to somebody that owed their daddy money to get a haircut. She was a nice lady, and I can't think of anything other than not special about her, except she was always sweet and nice. We would always go to her house just like we would any of the rest of the kin, you know.
All right.
And Joy had some kids that were close to my age, more Sid's age than mine, but Kathy married a guy named Perrault, Perrault, and he is an accomplished guy. I think he worked for a big construction company, but he is an author. He wrote an article in the Dothan Eagle. I forgot the name of it. For years, and they published it. You could probably find that. And his name was, I can't remember what his full name was, but the article was kind of ghost written. Nobody knew who it was, or some people did, but it was kind of like, not like the funny guy from Georgia, or the one that, like Sean of the South, you know what I'm talking about? SCAN of the South, Sean of the South, is a guy that writes articles.
Yeah.
And
Sean
anyway, he's kind of like him. And that was Kathy Arnold's husband. She's not Kathy Arnold. Then I had one named Susan, and Susan married Philip Hayes, who had children the same age my children. They all lived in Abbeville or Shoreville, and the Hayeses are big landowners up there. And Fred Arnold owned a hardware store, furniture store, right next to Uncle Oscar's Ezel's department store in Abbeville. and they are. I mean, we think very fondly of them, the Grace Brannon kids, because of Emily Ezel, living in Activille now, and Emily taught me how to throw a top and how to do a yo-yo and how to do a kip up, and she was an athletic lady, not very attractive, but in good health, and a great lady, Emily Vann Ezel. That's all of the.
That's all the Solomons. I think the next time I talk to you, we'll just go into your mama's siblings.
Good deal. I know a little bit about them, maybe more than you want to know.
No, that's good. Well, yeah, thank you so much for talking to me on your drive.
Well, thank you. I just pulled up in front of Little's house, and they're watching the ball game, and they started at 2:30. So I'll join them, and I'll talk to you later.
All right. Have a good day, Sam.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.